Hello, everybody. We are live. Welcome to our webinar, Principles of Coffee Packaging Design, How Roasters Can Boost Sales. I am hosting today. My name is Ross Hindle. I am the COO at PDG Media, and I have with me a number of international roasters and designers. On this webinar, which is powered by MT Back Coffee, we're going to look at something that is effectively more important now for roasters than ever before. How to use great packaging to capture mindshare and win sales. Always important, but today feels especially pertinent. So to discuss this, I am joined by, as I said, 3 leading international roasters and 2 designers that they have worked with. I'm going to give a brief overview before each of them tells us about their experiences designing coffee packaging and branding. And then after that, we will open things up for a Q&A at the end. So without any further ado, I will pass firstly to Tony and Maxwell to introduce themselves. Start with Tony.
Hey guys, Ross, thank you so much. Thanks for including us in this. It's really such an honor. I'll start by introducing our brand. So Metropolis Coffee is a 21-year-old roaster from Chicago, Illinois, USA. My dad and I are the owners. And the original branding and kind of iteration of the design happened. We were pre-open, and my dad and I were hanging out in the cafe, and a young designer walked in, and she said that she would design our logo. We said, great. She said, well, what do you like? What do you want it to look like? We said, okay, we're called Metropolis, and we like, let's see, like French metro stations and the Chrysler Building, and we brought in all this kind of absurdism too. My dad brought in I think a picture of a man on a unicycle with a duck on his shoulder. I mean, it was, I don't know how she did it. It was like an impossible task, right? She said, okay, I got it. And she came back with just this, I mean, our jaws just dropped. It was this Art Deco, Art Nouveau, just spectacular branding. And we fell in love with it. We opened shortly after, and it worked really well for us as, mostly as a wholesaler with a retail shop. Fast forward about, I guess, 16, 17, 18 years, and COVID hits. And all of a sudden, our kind of main line of business, which had been on-premise hospitality, cafes and restaurants, everything was shut down. We had a pretty good foothold in grocery, but we wanted to do more. But realizing expanding outside the city of Chicago, people didn't know us as well. And we just felt like also after 16, 17, 18 years of, throwing more and more insanity at our designers, the brand had become pretty all over the place. It needed more focus. It didn't quite represent who we are, and it certainly didn't convey that to somebody who has 0.2 seconds looking at a grocery shelf. So we found an incredibly talented designer and branding guy in Maxwell, and started the process of working with him on a brand refresh. And I'll turn it over to him to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and we'll get more into the details of how you guys did that a bit later. But for now, Maxwell, if you could just give us a few words on who you are and what you do.
So like Metropolis, I'm also based out of Chicago. I'm Maxwell Billings. Hi, everybody. I run 87, which is a branding and design studio that has clients across the globe. And we work with brands like Metropolis and founders like Tony to really articulate their vision and bring their business and brand together into something that really drives long-term value through storytelling, design, and just better thinking all around.
Fantastic. Thanks, Maxwell. So I will pass over now across the Atlantic to Brian and David. Brian, if you want to get us started just with a very brief intro, please.
Sure, no problem. Brian Kenny is my name. I'm the owner here at Silverskin Coffee. We are a roastery based in Dublin, in Ireland, and we specialise in cold brew, direct trade coffee, and we work directly with farms in Rwanda and in Guatemala. We set up the roastery in 2012. We were initially a retail outlet and then moved to roasting in a new premises. And that's where I met David and started working with David.
Yeah, so I'm David. I'm an Irish graphic designer, now based in Lisbon, Portugal. I've worked in Dublin design studios for a number of years, but since moving here, I now work globally with coffee companies, blockchain companies, health tech, and I can't wait to tell you more about my work with Brian.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And then finally, our third roastery back over the Atlantic in Canada. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about Birdy, please?
Hey, everyone. Yeah, thrilled to be here. It's kind of strange that we would be asked to do this. But yeah, we have put a decent amount of work into kind of some of our packaging, which is what we're going to talk about today. My name is Ryan, like I said, founder of Birdy Coffee in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. So we're up north a little further. Pretty young, started 5 years ago with Birdy, that is. We had another roastery before that, but changed gears with Birdy. Yeah, we just a style of coffee that wasn't readily available in our area. We just wanted to see people enjoying something outside of their comfort zone when it came to their coffee. And yeah, we'll get into kind of easy to say.
Sorry, Ryan, I think we lost you there for a second, but I think you're all done, right, with the intro?
I think so. My name's Ryan, Birdy Coffee, 5 years old. Thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. Well, back to me just for a moment before we pass to our first case study, which will be Tony and Maxwell. Before we look at the various principles of coffee packaging design, branding, and how the three roasters here with us today have all achieved this, I want to take a look at the challenge. So, everybody knows how crucial it is to win new customers as well as keeping existing ones. But the challenge with this is that customers, even in specialty coffee, often decide things quickly and on a whim. So whether they are ordering online or whether they are buying in a supermarket, data shows that most retail consumers look at a product for 3 seconds on average before they make a purchasing decision. That is not a whole lot of time to get your message across. So when we compound that with the fact that there are, as the data shows here, more roasters opening around the world with every passing year, it creates this unique challenge. And the final point of that, which we've mentioned here, is something called choice paralysis, which means that when you have more options, choosing gets harder. So what this means at the end of the day is that it is more important now than ever, really, to stand out as the market gets more competitive. I think if we now look at how we can do that, I have put together a few very short points, which are certainly not exhaustive, but some of the things that we see roasters do with their packaging. For instance, bold, distinctive colors. We can see from a lot of the images across this presentation that we're using for the webinar, there's plenty of evidence of that in specialty coffee, and we see that day in, day out with a number of different brands. The data that we have says that more than 90% of consumers buy initially and make an initial purchasing decision because of design instead of other characteristics. Second point we've got is humanity, which is obviously so crucial to specialty coffee. There's a lot of talk about storytelling and the people behind coffee, whether that's at origin or in the roastery. And there are a number of different ways that businesses achieve this with their packaging. Sometimes it can be handwriting, sometimes it's information about a farmer on a tasting card, for instance. Sometimes it is the images of the people behind the coffee, but that's on the website or on the packaging itself. But the next point, I think, is a counterpoint to that, which is that sometimes you can have too much of a good thing. And the concept of visual clutter is something that I think needs to be discussed. We've also, as much as we've seen bold and distinctive colors across the industry, we've also seen a lot of minimalism, which has been a very, very popular design style. I think there's there'll probably be some discussion about that later today. And it is something which has become incredibly popular for specialty coffee branding, I feel, over the last few years. But finally, I think visibility and clarity is a point that is crucial as well. Considering that people only look at a product on shelves for 3 seconds, we don't really have enough time to mix things up and let customers unpick it. So as I say, this is not an exhaustive list, and just a bit of an introduction before we pass over to our first case study, which is Tony and Maxwell. Now, Tony gave us a bit of a teaser earlier about how they designed the Metropolis branding initially and introed us to Maxwell. But I think I'd like to pass back over to the two of you to talk a bit further about this.
Sure. So thanks again. Well, I already said everything. You can just pass it. No, I think that, there's a couple things in where we got to with our brand. One is that we had developed a brand that was really convoluted, and also it just did not convey the message of our brand to a customer very quickly. And I think second, it didn't quite stand out from the other specialty brands that were on the shelf. It blended in with a lot of, Ross, to your point, the minimalism and kind of the more subtle design. We wanted something that was, very simple and bold and really got Metropolis and our spirit across quickly and hopefully would connect with a customer in a way that was substantial. And I think, in terms of the humanity, we really wanted the authenticity of Metropolis and not just the founder story, but the brand to come through, but without, too much complication Anyways, luckily we met Maxwell and he was able to take all of that and somehow distill down to more of the essence of our brand and put it into a design process that spoke to that and also got that across to the customer in a coherent way. Something I'm not capable of, by the way, obviously. So I'm going to stop talking now and pass it over to the person that actually knows what they're talking about, Maxwell.
Well, if y'all couldn't tell, a lot of personality and a lot of fun to be had with the Metropolis Coffee group. So that really sets the stage for when we got involved into the overall process, which was, like Tony mentioned, they had a look that had brought them really all the way up until 2020. And that's when 87 in my studio got connected and started to work together. And that's when we really started to assess that the bigger question of when does a coffee brand or any brand really stand out? Is it in that moment on shelf? Is it when you're in someone's home? Is it before people buy? But, all of that was to sort of set the tone of what we were going to do. So, back in September 2020, when we first had our meeting together, I was showing up at the roastery and that smell, oh my gosh, it was amazing. Just aroma just takes you over of just the smell of roasting coffee. And that we had a full day workshop there. So I had that just programmed in my brain. But along with meeting the team and seeing the operations and just getting a feel for the personality of the business and the brand, it became really clear that the inner sort of story and personality wasn't being reflected out into the world. And so in addition to, larger business pushes into retail and other opportunities, there was a real big opportunity to rethink the entire presentation of their packaging. So not just the, bag on shelf, but also how do we present as a whole? Competition was growing. There was other brands that were stepping into the arena, even just locally, not just nationally. And with any refresh, things can feel like a pretty big leap of faith. So, this had been on people's shelves and been in their homes for a long time. So no pressure, right? Of, hey, redo this thing that everyone's super familiar with. But clarity was a big key to our overall approach to what was the story that we were trying to tell, what is the larger message that we wanted to get across, and make sure that it could really connect with people. So even looking at the bag itself, going from the overall presentation, we moved some things around to where Metropolis became much more heroic. We owned color a bit more. We made it easier for people to, see the overall presentation, that this wasn't, while there were sort of the local components of, the story of being regional to Chicago and building up the relationships that we had. Metropolis is big, right? It's across the country. So we wanted to create not only just packaging, but a brand presentation that was able to take what they were doing and create more of a platform to where not just the bags, but the internal team, that customers, that other partners that they work with could tell that there's something different going on here.
And to that point, Maxwell, I just want to jump in. I have a couple of questions. When you did that, like, I know obviously there's a lot of history behind the brand, Tony, as you've explained, and where you started, but where did you draw inspiration from? Where did you look?
Yeah, so a big part of our overall process is really immersion in the business as a whole. So, like Tony mentioned, there's a lot of storytelling and history and discussions that had gone into all of the thinking for Metropolis up until this point. And so, not only were we sort of building off of that, but we also wanted to simplify. So, where were things that we felt aligned with the larger business goal of, hey, we want to be in some more premium shelf space. We want to elevate our overall approach and appearance. So that's where things like the Art Deco and the French Nouveau and those references started to give this kind of design elegance that we brought through to the final examples that you're seeing here.
And Tony, this is actually something I've wanted to ask you previously, but how much inspiration is there from the film Metropolis, from the 20s? Is that a part of it? I've always wondered.
Quite a bit, of course. The triumph of humanity over robots. Love it. Also, just recently learned that it's now in the public domain, so we can use it at will. But yeah, quite a bit. In fact, on our opening night, it was the winter solstice of 2003, we showed the film Metropolis, and it was, quite a bit.
Yeah, even on the side gusset of the bag here, we have part of the logo is the homage from the poster. So a lot of just storytelling elements throughout the package, the label itself, that play homage and take reference from it, just to weave it in and do something a little more interesting with, coffee packaging.
Oh, great. For anybody who is watching and hasn't seen it, really recommend giving that a watch. Metropolis is an awesome piece of cinema, but not what we're here to discuss. So I want to ask one more thing, because Tony, I know that you guys have diversified and started offering capsules, and I know that the boxes for those capsules have obviously been a significant part of this. When you're working on a rebrand, and you have to consider not just retail bags in various different sizes, but also boxes. This might be a question for Maxwell, it might be a question for you, I'm not sure. What do you have to consider when you're building that branding?
It's so interesting because what are you trying to get across with your packaging? Are you trying to get across kind of your brand at large? Are you trying to get across the product category, or even more specifically or further down the hierarchy, like what is the SKU? What is the type of coffee? What is the espresso capsule or whatever. You know, you also have to think about where is it going to be on the shelf or in the store, and will it be clear to somebody in, you said 3 seconds. I think that's being generous, what it is, why they should buy it. So I think it's an excellent question for Maxwell again, because we're actually in the process of going through a new iteration of our capsule packaging, kind of taking that into account.
Yeah, to Tony's point, the main thing is to keep the main thing, right? Simplicity. What is the story that you're trying to convey and connect with people? And, if you use that as your guide, that becomes the sole sort of thing that keeps a lot of the noise off of the package, but also makes it a very clear, simple message for people to get, because a lot of times you overcomplicate. So when it comes to the bag, there's a lot of things that went into it to work on the shelf to make sure it gets seen. But with the capsule component and just in general, obviously it's taking the larger story of how does Metropolis do capsules, which is a whole other conversation, but also what is the unique story that we want to tell there. So, we're certainly not giving anything away, but even with the capsules the packaging that we're exploring, that also is sort of answering the question of, well, how does Metropolis do this in our own unique way? And how can we still be expressive with our personality, even in the packaging, to where it's more than just color, but even just the idea and larger concept that we're trying to convey with the boxes and the packaging? How does that all tie together? So really it's less of looking at things as individual box, bag, and more of as a larger brand platform. How do we want these individual touch points to connect with people?
That's fantastic. Okay, well, do you guys have any closing points before we move on to Brian and David at Silverskin?
I think the biggest thing that I would just say is kind of one of the things that we've been hitting on is, really focusing on and answering the question of where do you want your brand to stand out? Where do you feel like there's the opportunity to spark something new in the experience? Because there are only so many colors that you can play with, and there are certain brands that have things locked in. So it creates a very unique creative storytelling opportunity to figure out, how can you be different in people's minds before they even enter the store? How can you be different in the store? How can you be different after purchase and go beyond the purchase to really make that connection with people?
And I think also it's important to not just not try to game out what you think a customer would want, but also to reflect, your own skin in the packaging, because I think that authenticity will come through one or the other, and the inauthenticity will have the opposite effect.
Yeah, I think authenticity is a really, really crucial component of this as well. You have to almost figure out who you are and how to be yourself as part of the process of a redesign with your packaging. Well, thanks very much, guys. That's really, really informative, really exciting, and I think everybody's come away with some film recommendations as well as a story about your packaging. But I want to move on to hear from Brian and David. If you guys could give us a bit of an explanation of the Silverskin.
Yeah, sure. I hope you have an hour clear for this, because this could go on. So the first time myself and David met each other, I don't know if he remembers this, he actually offended me. It's typical Irish meeting of minds.
I remember.
He told me my packaging was not the best. But since then, myself and David, just listening to the guys, Tony and Maxwell, it's an amazing story, and the similarities are unbelievable. When I sit and think the amount of things that myself and David have done besides offend each other occasionally, and listening to the guys, as I said, the similarities are amazing, but the relationship myself and David have now developed and the amount of pain I've put the man through is unbelievable. He's designed drinking glasses, cold brew cans, websites, hoodies, 24 packs of cold brew, 6 packs, 100-gram boxes, 2 logos. I don't know how many arguments we've gone through, and all from one conversation. It's amazing how it lines up with your story too, Tony. I mean, when there's a downturn or there's a problem with business, you got to pivot. And echoing what you said, Ross, I think it's essential now that people are rebranding all the time. It's not that you want it; it's that you have to. And I'll let David take over all the technical and shiny pieces, and I'll just chime in to tell him he's wrong occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, Brian's right. I mean, when we met, I mean, I was always aware of kind of different coffee roasters, especially in Dublin, and I just felt Silverskin's packaging and their brand identity, it could do with a refresh. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, your packaging's not great. Give me a shot at redoing it. And he got on the phone to me straight away and gave out to me. But we came to an arrangement anyway, and we started working together. And what that's led to is, you know, in a market where there's no shortage of roasters, there's no shortage of branding and packaging. I think attention is everything these days. And it's not just about bag on shelf anymore. It's about social media. It's about website. It's all about attention. And I think in developing the Silverskin brand identity and packaging system, very much the thought was, it wasn't like, what can we add to this to make it more interesting, to make it stand out more? The question was more, what can we actually take away, and can that make it stronger? Or what elements can we use in an unusual way? So I think one of the big points is that we don't have a traditional logo, and we don't use it in a traditional way. We've more developed an aesthetic, a look and feel, something that's quite brutalist, quite industrial, but has some vibrancy. And the reasoning behind that is the kind of industrial aesthetic, for me anyway, it communicates the technical quality of the coffee, which is something that Brian has developed really well. I mean, if you do get the chance to taste the coffee, it is excellent. And the vibrancy component in the brand identity, that's reflecting the coffee itself. So one of the ways we do this is using this iridescent coffee bean. And I think that's just to communicate to the audience that, I mean, the coffee is full of flavor, it's high quality, and it's unusual. But the second kind of objective of the visual identity, aside from it standing out, is to represent Brian and his roastery and his business. And if you look at Brian's content on social media, he's not a quiet person by any means. And that was one of the things I wanted to do with the brand identity, was to represent him, to represent his boldness, his loudness, his difference. And I think the brand identity reflects that. So those were the two objectives that I had.
I've got a question. I want to go back to talking about not having a logo, but rather an aesthetic. Am I right in saying, because I think I've seen it on social, on your website, that you guys will sometimes take letters away from the name? Am I right in thinking that's on the cold brew cans, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would ask, why not? There's a traditional way of doing things in branding. And I mean, the world is changing so quickly right now. Everything is up for grabs. I think what the most important thing is attention, is grabbing people's attention in whatever way you can. And so I think there's no rules anymore.
Yeah, one of the things, if I can just chime in, sorry, Ross, is the amount of trust that myself and David have in each other. So the amount we've been through together, the conversation's really simple. We're going to work on something. I completely trust David. And we bumped up against each other, as we said, and he knows when to put the foot down or take the foot off. So I think talking about using packaging for helping people sell coffee, obviously Tony and Maxwell as well. The relationship between the roaster and the person who's designing the brand, the visual, that needs to be really clear and coherent. So, like the guy said, you have to understand the person behind the brand, or what they want to do, or how they want to represent themselves. And I think David does that. I just throw an idea at him and let him run with it.
Yeah, just on that point, I think one of the reasons why the work has been quite successful is the trust that Brian has given me. And it's not something I always experience with other clients, that level of trust. But thinking in the context of, how can you get better results in a brand identity process? How can you have a more unique design that stands out? I would say trust your designer, trust the vision, and that'll lead to much better results.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the authenticity is something we were discussing with Tony. I think as a separate component and something else to discuss, there's also creative freedom, right? Like you have to have something which is unique, and it can't feel forced. And I think sometimes you do need to give a designer, whether that's an in-house brand team or an agency, the freedom to kind of almost figure out what you're doing and what you're about. And I really liked what you said earlier, David, that you tried to have the packaging, the branding represent Brian. I think that's really cool. That's really unique, and obviously the roastery and everything else. But I think lining it up as well with the personality and the presence elsewhere in marketing is really interesting. I have one more question. I asked Tony and Maxwell this, and I want to bring it over to you as well. Where did you draw inspiration from? I know you mentioned brutalism and industrial aesthetic, but is there anywhere else that you looked?
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly enough, if you do look up previous iteration of Brian's Silverskin packaging before we started working together, it's not dissimilar in aesthetic to how it is now. It was always black, white, silver, bold typography. So even himself, he was going down this path for whatever reason. I mean, obviously it's silver skin, so I mean, there's some obvious thoughts that come to mind with that. But for me, it was about, amplifying what he was already doing and combining it with my own personal aesthetic, which is very much in brutalist graphic design, brutalist architecture, electronic music, and also just Dublin in Ireland. I mean, it can be a grey, brutalist place in itself. And that's something that Brian wanted to reflect in the identity of Silverskin as well, as Dublin. And so this is kind of the inspiration and how we got there.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really awesome. Before we go to speak to Ryan, do you guys have any closing thoughts that you want to share?
No, I think that's okay.
Nothing from you, Brian?
No, I think we're good.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. It's really nice to have two stories that are so similar yet have resulted in such different packaging and such different designs. It's really cool.
Very different.
Yeah. Okay. And Ryan, I just want to, before we get started, I want to shout out that you guys were the winner of the 2023 Packaging Design Awards from TPAC, and these bags are so unique and so great. I just want to mention that first and foremost. But where did this come from? How did you guys come up with this as an idea?
I mean, I guess a start. Taking what you maybe had and changing it, not being afraid to do that. And we've done a little bit of that over the course of our short tenure. And so to start, my brother, I don't have anyone to deflect too much in the way of how did this happen. kind of story. But my brother Cody, who is wanting to be here as well, but he has other things that he's involved with today. He originally drew up Birdy Coffee Co. He had a passion for doing graphic design, logos. He's kind of a fashionable guy, maybe more so than myself. You know, he'll tell me what t-shirts are cool and what aren't. And so I kind of lean on him for colors and all those different things. And so he originally designed it, and he wasn't even involved in Birdy yet. So he, 4 years ago, left us with Birdy. We told him the name that we wanted. We said, this is what we've settled in on. And he came up with a very similar Birdy Coffee Co. that you even see on the bags today, although the font and text has changed a little bit. And the one thing I remember him saying was, I want to leave something in the logo that can be noticeable by itself later. You know, whether, I'm going to just akin it to something like the Nike swoosh or something. But, and so we've kind of leaned a little bit into that, as you see that backslash for the eye. So he left us with this Birdy. Originally there was, they were like pencil drawn kind of birds. And so when he came back, he's like, okay. And just like the other roasters that are talking about their packaging today, he's like, we're going to change it. We're going to get something that's going to get just a bit of a different recognition. So that's kind of the general logo Birdy idea that's happened over the past 4 years. And yeah, when it comes to the bags themselves and what you see, we wanted it to be more than just a visual. We wanted it to be something that you're like, I'm going to pick that bag up. I want to feel what it is. What's the texture? Where are we at? As well as what you see on the outside is very reflective of the taste inside the bag. So those were big proponents as to why we decided to go with the rice paper, some of the gold foil, why it folds forward instead of backwards, which was a very different take on that. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, a generalization of how Birdy, the bags you see now, kind of came to be over the last 4 years.
I want to talk obviously about the centerpiece of each of the bags, which is the birds and the designs. How do you choose them? Because it's a different one for each coffee, right?
It is, yeah. It's a different bird for each coffee. At first, we thought, do we want to have a bird from that origin piece that represents it? But what we found out is that like national birds, almost of every country, is some type of like bird of prey. America's got the eagle, and there's like vulture. There's all, and we're like, that's not going to work. So really, we kind of leaned into the bird and the colors that represent what's happening in the bag. So if you see something that's a little bit more subdued, maybe the colors aren't as poppy, it's probably a little bit more of a traditional coffee. Something that has a big bird of prey might be a darker coffee. And then to the flip side, if you have something that's bright and exotic, that coffee in that bag is going to be that. It's going to be bright and exotic. But really, as far as the birds themselves, that's my brother going, I just want to do what I want to do. And I want people to enjoy the bird that I've created. And that's kind of how we picked it. So no reference to the country or origin. It's just us doing what we wanted to do in those bags.
We've actually already had a question in the chat about that, and whether or not that was the case, whether they did come from the countries that the coffee came from. Yeah, I also noticed that you guys use a lot of different colors. And I mean, do you, because you said that you would use maybe slightly more vibrant colors, sorry, for a more exotic or more unusual, let's say, flavor profile for the coffee. How do you decide that? What's what's the process with that? Do you kind of sit down and cup the coffee and think, yeah, that's definitely a bright purple, or like at what point does that happen?
Yeah. So my brother Cody, who does the packaging design work, he does a lot for us too. So he's not just someone who does the design. We drink the coffees together. He's involved in, I mean, he helps barista at our cafe, all sorts of things. So we're kind of involved, and he'll ask me like what coffees are coming down the pipe, because I'm the one that purchases them and roasts them. So he'll ask me, and he'll start to get some ideas. You know, he'll ask, like, is it a natural? Where are we going to roast this coffee? And then once he kind of has an idea, then we taste them, and he can kind of go to the direction he chooses regarding that. Some of the birds you see, he'll take the same design and flip some of the colors depending on kind of where that coffee lies. And it's a bit of his expression on how his creative process as to what he's tasting, what he's feeling that coffee represents. And much to how Silverskin's like, I'm going to give you the kind of the green light to do what you want to do. I do a lot of the same thing with Cody, letting him design the bag without too much interference outside of some notes here and there. But yeah, that's kind of the general way. And we have the luxury of, we're not a massive producer. So changing things on the fly is easy. We print all of our own center labels ourselves. So we can do that on the fly, knowing full well that things grew, things changed. We would adapt to that. But also asking cafes and stockists that carry our coffee, what do you want to see? What do people look for when all things are the same? There's a lot of great coffees. Like, we get to sit on the shelf with some incredible coffee roasters from all over the world, Alberta to Dublin, all over the place. So what is it that people are looking for visually if there's some great coffees in all of those bags? And so we took a lot of feedback, and we asked, how important is it? We did our research into, if we were to sit on your shelves, what is important? Is it just the coffee? Is it just the packaging? And I think you guys know the answer, but how important is the packaging? What needs to stand out if we're going to take up some of your retail space on your shelves? And so a bit of an ever-changing color in a way isn't a bad thing, even though we don't want to create too much whiplash. And that's another proponent to having things change all the time, is we didn't want to create whiplash, but we do have a turnover of a lot of different single origin coffees. So yeah, they can't stay in the same bag because they're different coffees, but we don't want the look to change so drastically that people just are not familiar with what they might be expecting from Birdy.
Yeah, because for instance, with all three of these photos we've got up on the slide here, the colors change, the bird changes, but everything else stays the same, right? You have to keep some consistency to it.
That's right. Yeah. And a lot of the words, the actual information that's being relayed, we wanted that to be simple, but not too wordy. I think we've picked up a coffee bag from time to time where there's an essay on the bag as to what's involved, where it came from. And for a lot of people, it's just foreign to them. They maybe can't decipher it as well as maybe we could. But then also too, there are people looking for qualities of what.
I think we might have lost you there for a second, Ryan, just for the end of that. I'm not sure. There might be a...
You got me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay.
I had one last question, which was the same thing I asked Tony and Maxwell, and also Brian and David. We've had Art Deco, French Nouveau. We've had brutalist industrial design. Is there an inspiration that you would say is behind the overall aesthetic for Birdy's bags?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a designer, so all of those words that you just mentioned regarding kind of like the structure of like, I mean, I know what some of them are, but as far as like picking a theme and really running with it, I would say no. I know with the and there was almost like it's almost like drawing from being an inner kid, I guess. But to use a word or a style specifically, I don't know if we have one. Inspiration wise, though, if I was to just touch on inspiration, I mean, Silverskin, I see that you guys have a box. We loved the idea of like a tactile, like being able to touch it. And I can't tell on the screen, but and maybe you guys can answer to it, but is there like an embossed feel to that box?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
embossed and a varnish.
Yeah, and so that was really important, was having something tactile. So on our bags, they're made of rice paper, and we wanted that touch. And on the inside, there's an embossed foil. So we drew inspiration from like if you couldn't see, but you could hold them, that it still might hold some value as far as what's in there. So definitely a touch to match the visual was important. Hence the forward fold on our new bags and the rice paper. And so that was the inspiration. So Onyx Coffee Roasters, if you guys are familiar, there's another one locally, Rooftop. So we looked at some of the bigger hitters and we're like, what are they doing that's really fun? And we drew our inspiration from some of those around us doing really cool things with their packaging.
Can I ask you a question, Ryan?
Yeah, for sure.
When you're cupping, are you cupping in colors when you're tasting coffee? I can't remember what the actual technical term for that is, but when you're tasting in colors, do you taste the coffee and imagine what color is going to go on the packaging from tasting it? Do you think that happens naturally, or is that a conscious decision?
Yeah, great question. I would say to a degree. I mean, sometimes it's like in the case of something that's fruity, red fruit. Yeah. I mean, to say I taste in colors, I don't want to sound like I'm being super weird, but there is a little bit of that happening.
Yeah.
And if it's a
really there's a technical term for it. It's an actual thing.
Yeah, I know.
Synesthesia.
That's it. That's it. That's it.
And that might, I guess that's, to answer that question, it would be that. You kind of just feel like there's this happening when it comes to the color and maybe trying to project that forward, hoping that other people that maybe share that same quality of sensory taste can enjoy it. And that's where we would land on a lot of those. Sometimes it isn't picked up by other people. Even some coffees that are a little bit more traditional in flavor might have some acidity that's really strong for somebody else, or might be a little bit wild. Yet we might put it in a bag that's not tropical, even though, it's our representation. But as long as people have an understanding of that's what Birdy's doing, and therefore that's kind of the flavor that's being represented, hopefully that gets paralleled over time. And but yeah, great question. I mean, I haven't really thought too much of that, but it is something that is in our psyche when we're choosing colors and or coffees that are going in them.
Great. Well, I'm conscious that we are kind of running towards the end of the slot for this webinar. Ryan, any last thoughts you want to share before we move on to the Q&A?
I don't think so. Just, thanks again for asking us to come on here and talk about our packaging. What a fantastic opportunity, especially with you guys who are doing such a great job. It's so cool to hear your stories. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Okay, so we already have some questions in the chat, but if you have been struck by the inspiration to ask a question, please do. Tony, this first one is for you. Can you see that on the screen?
I can. Tony, can you correlate an increase in sales to your packaging redesign? The answer is emphatically yes. Our velocity, the speed at which we sold bags at stores, increased And then we got into hundreds and hundreds more stores once the brand was clearly conveyed through the packaging, including Costco. So yeah, we really saw an increase in sales based on the packaging redesign, no question.
A follow-up.
Oh, exciting strategic shift that excited your staff and also your customers. You know, that's such an interesting question because well, just talking about the staff, everybody is, has been for the most part, quite loyal to the mission. The question is, what is the mission? And I think through the branding and packaging redesign process, it gave us a chance to really kind of push at that question a little bit more and more clearly define it. And it started to seep into many other areas of our company where we were able to more clearly say, okay, we have this idea. It's called great coffee for everyone. Okay, what does that mean? And how does not only the packaging, but the messaging on the bag and really all the other aspects of the company get at that? This idea that, coffee can create positive benefit for everyone who's attached to it, including us and the people that work at our company. And so I think it really did provide a great deal of fuel for excitement, I guess, among our staff and I think among our customers as well. The strategic shift was really focusing more on retail, and I think that was also great when people aren't sure what direction the company's headed or what you're focused on. Sometimes their efforts diffuse out too much, and they don't feel like what they're doing is really having much impact or benefit. And so I think focusing on retail with this packaging redesign and a clear brand and brand difference really did, yeah, for sure, definitely. And I think just one last thing, as a brand owner and kind of growing up in the brand over the 20 plus years, I was a little too close to it, and I think having an outside voice through, working with, in our case, a branding agency really did help to ask questions of ourselves that we wouldn't normally ask of ourselves, to challenge us on assumptions that we were making about our company or about the marketplace. And so I can't speak highly enough of that process, working with a talented, somebody that makes you angry, right? But also really challenges your mostly closely held assumptions about, what are you, who do you serve, why do you serve them, is it working, and also what could you do differently, bringing inspiration from outside of coffee into that process as well.
That's great. I think we'll pass this one to Brian and David. We'll share the questions around. So can you guys see that?
Yeah. So how do you convert a strong style into a more of a strong overall aesthetic? Okay. So I mean, coherence is really important, and I think we spoke about earlier with Silverskin how we don't rely on one thing like a logo. What we have is a system, and there's many different brand elements in it. And so then what becomes really important then is coherence, is consistency, is using it consistently. So I think what can help is, defined brand assets like your color palette, your typographic style, your layout style. Those things go a long way to, employing an aesthetic in a coherent way. No matter what the touch point is, a piece of merchandise, piece of packaging, something on the web, coherency is the most important thing. But I think the other point is, how can you do that and still leave room for creativity? And that's one thing I think that Birdy does really well, that they've created a system which allows the brand to be very recognizable, but there's plenty of room for creativity, and that's what makes it interesting and what makes people love it.
That's great. Brian, any follow-ups on that? Oh no, we're on to the next question. Okay, Ryan, I'll pass this one to you if that's all right. How do you create the design for limited editions or seasonal offerings?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we do. We have only a couple different blends that traditionally stay with the logo, well, for the time being, as long as we've had them. And so it's every coffee as we bring in different single origin, seasonal lots, things that we are excited about. And it's part of what makes and gets us excited. And we know that our customers are looking for that. They see a new bird and or color or origin on the bag, and they get excited and they get asked questions. And they might ask questions, why the bird and why the color and all of those things. And so, yeah, to Cody being able to just recognize the coffee that we have and move on from there. We've also done, to kind of sidebar this same question, we've taken the same lot, the same farm, and maybe some of the different processes that are in there, and we'll have the same bird and slight variations of the colors. So for example, like the Costa Rican coffee, and we'll have one that's natural. We had one that was a washed anaerobic, and then we had one that was a flour processed anaerobic. And so we're like, how do we do this maintaining some continuity? And we just took the same bird, but then we just changed the colors slightly across. So you knew all three coffees were the same farm, but we just had a little bit of a different color to them. So we get the luxury of doing that for every one of ours on the limited edition and seasonal offerings. And
I guess that's, you can really add like variations on a theme when you're changing the color of the birds and kind of keep a cohesive visual identity between them, so that you can kind of know at a glance like these two might be similar.
That's right.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, on to the next question. I'll leave this one up for grabs.
Please don't come to me with that question.
Any takers?
I got
I'm
one.
joking. Yes, yeah. Go for it.
Can I answer that quickly?
Go.
Just a funny story. This is a lesson learned. I'm glad it was early when we were still printing our own labels, and it wasn't something that went into mass production. But as you're kind of going through it, we typed Colombia on one of our coffees, and we used a U instead of the O, as if it was like the brand of Colombia, not the country of. Yeah. And it was just something that totally slipped. And I was like, what have I done? Like I just offended an entire country.
Yes.
And so luckily it was like a quick reprint. It didn't, but it did go on social medias for a second, and someone pointed it out, and you're just like, yeah. So spell check everything for sure and make sure that's happening. But anyway, that's just a quick story on misspelling a country.
There's also a pretty famous story. I don't know if it's made up, of a well-known English brand. I'm not going to name them, a tea company, and their new packaging passed through all of the people in the company, and they left a T out of the name in the branding on their new packaging. It cost a hell of a lot of money to launch it. They very cleverly then placed a T inside the tea bag box and told people if they found it, they won this prize, to cover up for the stock that they'd messed up. So you can recover from it. But please don't ask David what mistakes I've made, or we generally could be here all night.
Well, if anybody has any others to offer up, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
Just on Brian's point, double check everything, check it again, get somebody else to look at it, because once a print run has happened, there may not be any turning back. So check and check and check.
Especially websites and QR codes.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, on to the next question, please. All roasts having the same color of packaging. Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, all roasts can have the same color of packaging, and then the label is doing the work for you, right? You mean roast styles? Is that what we're talking about, or?
I think so, yeah. So if you have you keep a light, medium, and a dark roast, let's say, all in the same color, you know, is that something that you guys would consider?
I think
Um,
it's a bad idea to make people to assume that people are going to take the time to read. So I think it's good to have some kind of clear differentiators between styles of coffee. In our case, it's mostly roast style more so than like processing, knowing our customers. Second, in our research, we found that more customers in grocery stores were shopping by roast level over
Yeah.
origin or really pretty much anything else. So for us, the key was differentiating between different roast levels first and foremost, and then that puts them in the right place to be able to make a choice.
That's great. I mean, was somebody else about to talk when Tony started as well? I don't know if there's another viewpoint we've got there.
Just to add to Tony's point, I think the real button for that is just empathizing with what the customer is looking for, right? Where if you are in the more premium space, then all of a sudden the shift might be toward origin versus roast. But if you're trying to get someone who's looking for their everyday coffee, they're in a slightly different buying mindset. So I think, yeah, it could be solved, right, from the Silverskin team. Yeah, it could be solved one way and shifted with the label. Or if you have the ability to print color bags and variation, go ahead and do that. But I think to make sure you have success with the execution, if it makes sense with your customer, I think that's the real takeaway.
Right. Okay, well, I think we've got time for one last question, which just popped up here. Ryan, I know you were talking about the texture and feel of a bag.
Yeah, it's big, and obviously towards me mentioning Silverskin and Onyx being able to pick up the bag and have a tactile difference to other things, or maybe it just makes you pick it up and then that's kind of the one you're walking out of the store with. I think it's pretty big. I mean, we chose specifically rice paper for a couple options, but one of them being just that it had a different feel than your typical material. And so it definitely played a massive role in why we picked that, as far as the texture and the feel that's happening there. And so people are bespoke these days. We have a bespoke group of people looking to purchase any good, and if it's something that's just one more added touch or tactile move, then I think that's going to be in the benefit of your business.
Nice. Any further thoughts on texture and feel before we round up?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something that Brian and I have wrangled on a few times, is material. And I've always tried to push him towards textured stocks, emboss, things like that, which come at a higher cost, of course. But for me, I think tactility is really important, especially in a world that's more and more digital, and we have fewer and fewer opportunities to touch a piece of packaging and to hold a product. I think that human touch is just more and more important these days.
Yeah, it's a real nice combination of the literal tangible and intangible, right? Like with product packaging in general, there's a handshake to it. You're feeling something and someone throws a bag in your hand, you're like, I don't know, this just feels nice. That's why we all feel
Yeah.
guilty throwing away our iPhone boxes. It's like, it just feels nice. Like, I don't know how else you want me to describe it. And like, once you click in, like that little moment for a lot of customers and people is enough of that first spark to get things moving into, sure, now it's in my cart. Now it's in my kitchen. Now it's part of my routine.
I have to say, I feel incredibly seen by the comment about keeping your phone boxes. I think it's something I've made a habit of for the past 15 years. Anyway, thank you everybody for your questions. Unfortunately, we have plenty more, but we don't have time to get through all of them. We could be here for several more hours. Before we finish up, I just want to shout out quickly MT Pack Coffee, who are powering this webinar, are currently running the Packaging Reimagined Contest. There's just over 2 weeks left to enter. Entries are open. It is celebrating innovative packaging, whether that's sustainable materials, great design, maximizing freshness in unique ways. So if you're interested, there is a prize, either $5,000 cash or $10,000 in packaging credit. Please do apply. There are only just over 2 weeks left. And with that, we are done. Thank you so much to everybody who came to watch today, and thank you to all of our roasters and designers who have joined us for the past hour. Anybody got any closing thoughts before we finish up?
Just to say thanks again. Thanks for having us.
Well, thanks for joining, everybody. It's been fantastic to have you all here. Some really great points made. And yes, the link to the competition that I just mentioned is in the comments. You can also find it on the MT Pack Coffee website, which is listed here, mtpack.coffee. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll finish that there. See you all soon. Bye.